Hello and salaam alaikum, everyone. Um, Inshallah, if you've had an opportunity to look at my other video, the video that I did prior to this one, um, I hope you found it interesting, and I hope as well that you will find this one equally interesting. Today, I'd like to do a video on what is known as Satan in Islam, particularly from the perspective of the Quran. And once again, it's going to be in a series of videos because unfortunately, these videos do take some time. They're usually done in story format. So unfortunately, it's not something I can do, or certainly I don't have the the experience yet anyhow in being able to boil it down into 5 minutes or even 10 minutes. So I apologize for the length, but I think that I hope that it will be something worth your time. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Okay, so one of the figures within Islam is the shaitan, or the devil as is known in the West. Now, what's interesting about the shaitan, or this Satan, is that this particular creature or individual has various names. Okay, but obviously the well-known is Satan, or in Arabic, shaitan. Just to give you a little bit of background about his name. Now, Islamic hadith say that he actually he has a few names. So one of them being Harith or Harath, and of course there is also Azazel. Okay. Now all these names refer to the exact same thing. So Harith and Harath. Harath is just a version of Harith, and Azazel as well refers to God's dear, or someone that is close to God, or that is dear to God. And the reason why that is because he was actually, before he became the devil, he was actually a very close servant of God. And it's interesting because some Islamic scholars, not a predominant, but some Islamic scholars do believe that he was actually an angel. It's not something that is widespread in terms of this belief, but it is something that some Islamic scholars have come to believe. Now, his name also is Iblis, and this is also one of his names. So, but the term Iblis has alternate names as well. So he was also named Abu Mura, and of course this name means father of bitterness, right, as the name stems from mur, which means bitter. Okay, so Abu Mure, this word, it stems from the word mur, and this of course means bitterness. He also has another name called Adua, or Aduwallah, or Aduwallah. And this means enemy or foe of God. And oftentimes in the Quran, he's actually referred to as the enemy of man. Okay, and as such, he is also the enemy of God in a loose sense of the term. I mean, in Islamic theology, there is no acknowledgement really amongst the scholars, Islamic scholars, that God has a true enemy in the sense of an equal rival. There is also a reference to the term al-jinn, or and the word jinn etymologically is from a root word meaning to hide or to be hidden. Okay. Now, the one that we're most familiar with, certainly in the West, is Satan. Okay, or in Arabic, shaitan. Now, shaitan or Satan is basically a generic term that refers to any vicious and deceiving personality, whether that be in reference to Satan himself, the subject of this discussion, or whether it be in reference to someone who is, as we might say, is like a Satan. He's like he has the personality of a devil, okay, or is devilish. Okay. Now, there is also the epithet or the title that is also given to Satan. Okay, and then in the Islamic tradition, he is known as the one who is the accursed. Okay, essentially someone who's been cursed essentially by God. So those are the various names which we have for the devil. Particularly, I like to use shaitan, or sometimes I like to use iblis, because it's a little bit less, it carries less, well, anyways, I like to use these terms, and that's what I'll be doing going forward. So I'll be switching between shaitan, or I'll be switching between iblis. Okay. Now, it is also known in Islamic tradition that Satan is from the jinn race. Now, the jinn race is another set of creatures that have been created by God, that also has free will, and that were created by him to worship him, just as mankind was as well, or humanity was. They also, like I said, possess free will, but their bodily constitution is very different. Whereas we are made of clay, they are made of what is said to be smokeless fire. Okay, and there's reference to that also in the Quran. Now, what's interesting about his physical makeup is that these jinn entities, or race, they're able to move between physical objects in space. They're able to come into our world, manifest themselves in ways that we can't necessarily recognize them. They can also see us. However, we cannot see them. And this is also something that's referenced or mentioned in the Quran. Okay. In addition to that, the jinn race has the ability to influence our thoughts, and to some extent our emotions as well, as a result, or through our thoughts. And the way they do that is they have the ability to whisper. And at the level of our consciousness or our minds, and thereby affect. And it can be about anything. They can whisper about anything. They can, through this whisper, conjure up desires or feelings in us that is not necessarily good for us. All right, it can be something as simple as, maybe late at night you decide, oh, I just want to go eat something that you shouldn't be eating late at night. Okay, ice cream or cookies or whatever. Right? It can be something as simple as that, to something as extreme as being so angry, getting so angry that you may want to do someone bodily harm. Okay, so it can be of either extreme. So what I like to do now, after just sort of talking about who this creature is, and just kind of giving you some context of that, I'd like to now go through some verses that have been given in the Quran, and just that will sort of unearth a little bit more about the role of the devil, certainly from the perspective of the divine, and what are some of the things that as spiritual creatures, particularly creatures who are interested in worshiping God, acknowledging Him in our daily life and in our daily worship, what are some of the things we need to be mindful of? Okay. The Quran says, "And behold, we said to the angels, bow down to Adam, and they bowed down. Not so Iblis," or Shaitan. "He refused and was haughty. He was of those who rejected faith." So if you haven't had a chance to watch the video that I did prior to this one, I would encourage you to do that, because this verse actually is in reference to that video, because I did a whole video on Adam alayhi salam, which is the father, Adam and Eve, which is the father and mother of humanity, and the role that Iblis played in their downfall, so to speak, and there were some things that were said there that could lend to this video and to add more context as well. But needless to say, this verse does make reference to that, and essentially what it's talking about is there was a time when God had ordered the angels to bow down before Adam after He had breathed of His spirit, right, into Adam. He ordered all the angels to bow down, and of course, although the Iblis, who is a jinn, wasn't an angel, he was certainly amongst them, and he had been a very close servant of God, to the extent where he was actually assumed into heaven, etc., etc. And at one point, he was, along with the angels, commanded to bow down before Adam. And this is really where his story really starts to take on significance for humanity, or for us. So when he was ordered along with the angels to bow down, they all bow down except him. Now, God says something very interesting about that. He says he was of those who rejected faith. And what's interesting about that is that what the Quran is really trying to tell us here is that faith really rests on the obedience of God's command, no matter where we are, whether we are in heaven or whether we're on earth. Right? He was of those who rejected faith. He was of those who rejected the command of Allah. And as a result, well, the story goes that God asked him, he says, well, Allah asked him, Allah says, well, O Shaitan, what prevented thee from bowing down when I commanded thee? He said, well, I am better than he being Adam. Thou didst create me from fire and him from clay. Something, of course, I had mentioned a moment ago. God said, well, get thee down from this place. It is not for thee to be here. Sorry, it is not for thee to be arrogant here. Get out, for thou art among the degraded ones. So the degraded ones here means it has an Arabic word that means al-sagirin, okay? And of course in English it means degraded. But this al-sagirin comes from the word sagar, right? And it really means to be abased and dishonored. It means to be stripped of one's honor, okay? So he was stripped of his honor, and he was expelled from the place where it's not for him to be arrogant, or no arrogance can exist in this place. In other words, God is saying, in this place, the command is always obeyed. And since you are not exemplifying humility, then we have stripped you of your honor, right? Which comes from your humility. This is interesting. And this is something that we as servants of God, we have to keep in mind, in that our honor and our dignity comes through obedience and following the command of God. Iblis said to God, he says, if thou wilt but respite me to the day of judgment, I will surely bring his descendants under my sway, all but a few. God said, well, go thy way. If any of them follow thee, verily hell will be the recompense of you all, an ample recompense. Lead to destruction those whom thou canst amongst them. With thy seductive voice, make assaults on them with thy cavalry, and with thy seductive on them with thy cavalry and thy infantry, and be their partner in wealth and children, and make promises to them. A bit of a long verse, but essentially what's happening here, he has asked God for respite till the day of judgment, to the day that we are raised all together. And God, of course, in the Quran gives him this, answers his prayer, because this is actually a prayer that he eventually makes to God. The traditions say that, and I mentioned this in my previous videos, the traditions say that he asked God, is there no justice in, he says, well, God, you are the just, and is there no justice for a servant who has worshipped you and celebrated your praises for a long time, as he had done? And God said, yeah, of course. And ask for whatever you wish. And this is certainly one of the things that he asked for. He made dua and he asked for this, and God granted him that. And that, of course, is to be given eternal, or not eternal life, but life until the day of judgment. And God granted him that. And then he said, well, because you have, because God says, well, he says, because you have put me in the wrong, I will mislead the descendants of Adam al-Islam. All right, including Adam. He's making this threat that including Adam and his descendants, all humanity, he will try to bring them under his sway. He says, all but a few. Okay, I will do this with them, all but a few of them. And God says, well, okay, well, go, whatever you want to do. It's okay, but just be sure that whoever follows you, you and them, whoever follows you, I will put you into the hellfire, right? And this will be an ample or just recompense for you doing whatever it is that you're about to do. But what's interesting here is God talks about, well, go ahead and lead to destruction whom you will with your seductive voice, right? Make assaults on them with your cavalry and infantry, meaning your companions, those who follow you, and be their partner in wealth and children, right? So God's saying, well, you can allow, you can seduce them to the point where they can seek after wealth and riches in this world in ways that are not necessarily the best, right? We know of people who, and he says, I make promises to them. So we know of people who are so, have been seduced by the evil ways of life, or accumulating wealth and accumulating power in this world, that are not necessarily through just or moral means. This is kind of what this verse is trying to talk about. And it's interesting because God is trying to show us that it's through the craving of wealth and And of course, women and children and all these things that we sometimes lose our way, right? Anyways, the verse continues. The pagans leaving him call but upon female deities. They call but upon Shaitan, the persistent rebel. God did curse him, but he said, I will take of thy servants a portion marked off. I will mislead them, and I will create in them false desires. I will order them to slit the ears of cattle and deface the fair nature creature created by God. Whoever forsaking God takes Shaitan for a friend hath of a surety suffered a loss that is manifest. Shaitan makes them promises and creates in them false desires, but Shaitan's promises are nothing but delusion. So kind of repeating the same sort of thing as the previous verse, but there's some things that I want to sort of reference here that's very important, in that God says that Shaitan says that, I will take a portion of your servants marked off. I will mislead them. I will create in them false desires, kind of what we were talking about just now. And I will order them to, deface or slit the ears of cattle and deface the fair-natured creature created by God. And this is just merely in reference to our mistreatments of animal communities on the planet, the things we do with them that are obviously inhumane, as well as deface the fair-natured creature created by God. And that lends to not only animals, but it lends to every type of the entire environment, okay, of the earth itself, and the way we go about damaging the environment and the creatures in it. And it all has an underlying motive under which people sometimes do these things, right? And he says that, and God says, well, whoever forsaken Allah takes Shaitan for a friend hath of a surety suffered a loss that is manifest. So God says, well, whoever follows him, it really is a great loss, right? And he says, because that Shaitan makes these promises to people through inciting false desires, but in the end, right, he creates in them false desires. And that's really what it comes down to, right? It's just false desires that people act upon. But God says that really and truly, this Shaitan promises nothing but delusion. So in the end, these are things that really and truly, they don't really hold any kind of real spiritual lasting implications for man or benefit for man. Now the Shaitan says, because thou hast put me in the wrong, I will make fair seeming to them on earth, and I will put them all in the wrong, except thy servants among them sincere and purified by thy grace. So I read this verse again because this verse has something a little bit different than before, where he's saying now that, yeah, he's acknowledged that he will mislead humanity and a portion of humanity, except for those who are sincere and purified by your grace. Now, what's interesting to point out here is that oftentimes, certainly within Shia Islamic tradition, it is referenced that this refers to the prophets, and of course there's really no, and I've said this in the previous verse as well, there's really no reason for us to think that. I mean, it does in the sense that it does, but not in an exclusive way. But what it really refers to when it says, except thy servants among them sincere and purified, it means except for anyone who decides to turn to God. in sincerity and is purified as a result of their turning to God in sincerity. And God says to him, well, yeah, this way of my sincere servants is indeed a way that leads straight to me. For over my servants no authority shalt thou have, except such as put themselves in the wrong and follow thee. So once again, the Quran says, look, yeah, the Quran says to him when he says, God says to him when he says, well, I will mislead all of your servants except those who are sincere and purified. God says, well, yeah, of course, this is the way that leads to me. Of course you can't, right? And God goes on further to say, well, yeah, that's because you have no authority over them. He says, except those who put themselves in the wrong and follow thee. So this is the part where that's interesting for those of us who are pondering this verse that talks about these servants who are sincere and purified. God is saying that these servants who are pure and purified, they arrive that way because they are not of those who put themselves in the wrong and follow him, right? In other words, God says, well, his authority over humanity only exists to the degree that humanity accepts him, embraces him, and follows him. Okay? Okay. And this idea of authority is actually even demonstrated in some of the other verses in the Quran where God says, indeed, there is for him no authority over those who have believed and rely on their Lord. Surely as for my servants, you have no authority over them, and your Lord is sufficient as a guardian and protector. So what's interesting here is the last verse that I just read where it says, your Lord is sufficient as a guardian or a protector. This word guardian or protector is interesting because what the Quran is trying to say here is that his authority obviously ends in where it begins in the guardianship of God, in that those who are sincere and those who rely on God, they actually are protected from him by the Lord, by God's ability to guard and protect his servants. Okay. And it's interesting when we think about that, because we have to ask the question, what is it that brings on the protection or the guardianship of God? We know, of course, so far that sincerity is definitely one of the salient features of what protect us and helps us to acquire this protection from Shaitan, where he has no authority over us. And as we continue in the video, we will, of course, encounter some more. I want to just end the video here because we're getting to the point where it's close to half an hour, and I don't want to go on much further. I don't want to make the video much longer, but I will continue in part 2 of the next part of the video. Hopefully you will join me. All right. Assalamu alaikum, and take care for now.